Chainsaws and other machines may dominate forestry, but the human-powered crosscut saw still has a basic appeal. Pushed and pulled through the trunks of trees, its jagged blade can handle any job. That is, until the person operating it runs out of gas. Making a crosscut saw is an exact science that dates back centuries. At this factory, they make these saws the old-fashioned way, mostly by hand. It's a nod to a time when these saws were at the forefront of history, helping to clear the way for railways and settlements. With guillotine blades, a worker first trims a steel rectangle along the lines measured and marked onto it. The trimming gives it a distinctive taper and establishes the correct dimensions. This particular saw is a one-person model, so it's about 3 feet long. Using a punch cutter, the worker carves gullets in the steel. These are the valleys between saw teeth through which sawdust and debris are cleared. He cuts 1 gullet every inch. He then cuts the teeth, 3 between each gullet. This pattern is known as the Great American Tooth. It's designed to cut medium to hardwoods across the grain without snags. He hammers each tooth to bend it and alternates the direction of the bends. One up, the next down. This is called setting the teeth. And the result is protruding teeth that cut more efficiently. He files each tooth, working from the bottom up to the tips, and sharpens those tips to a point. It takes about a half hour to give this steel blank its cross-cutting edge. A worker then connects the blade to a power source. He centers a stencil of the company logo on the saw, and then applies liquid electrolyte to the exposed metal within the stencil. He turns on the power, and the electrolyte conducts the current to burn the logo into the metal. A computerized router carves a piece of beech into the pistol-shaped handle. This software-driven tool also drills holes for installing the blade. The computerized system is quicker and more precise than manual carving. An employee then cuts a slot in the handle to fit the saw. He sands the edges of the handle until it's smooth. He then inserts the crosscut saw blade into the handle. It's a tight fit, but to more solidly entrench it, he drills through the holes in the wood handle to make corresponding holes in the metal blade sandwiched within it. He inserts screws into the handle, securing the blade to it. He tightens the screws as much as possible. And this one-person saw is now complete. A two-person crosscut saw is crescent-shaped and longer to cut through bigger trees. The teeth are also more substantial with deep pitches between them. Sawdust will be expelled through these deep pitches, so there's no need for gullets in this particular cutting edge. Once the teeth have been cut, a worker places socket fittings on each end of the saw. He pounds in rivets to secure the fittings to the blade. These fittings will be used to install a different kind of handle known as a fist grip, which is more suitable for a two-person saw. It's essentially a wooden dowel that just slides into the socket fitting. It has taken about an hour to make this crosscut saw. Wielded with force, it will cause mighty trees to fall, proving that this low-tech tool can still cut it on the job site. The main ingredient in glass is silica sand. When you heat it along with other chemicals, it turns into a syrupy liquid that you can then mold or blow into a particular shape. Add lead oxide and you've got lead crystal. It's much softer than regular glass, making it easier to decorate with intricate cut designs to enhance its brilliance. Craftsmen start with silica sand, which is a very pure type of sand. Then they add nickel oxide to help the silica sand melt, lead oxide, potassium carbonate, potassium nitrate, and antimony to give the finished crystal its smoothness, heft, and sparkle. They compress the mix into pellets. They heat the pellets for 18 hours, creating a mass of molten glass that they can call the melt. To that, they add cullet, the term for excess broken or rejected crystal. Cullet smooths out the melt. A blower now uses a hollow blowing iron made of tempered stainless steel to collect some of the melt. He constantly rotates the iron so the melt clings together in what's called a gather. The blower rolls the gather on a heat-resistant table. This sparks a flame because the table is coated with beeswax to prevent the molten crystal from sticking. The blower exhales a slow, steady breath of air to create the base of the piece called the ball. After letting it cool for 90 seconds, he dips the ball back in the furnace to coat it with another layer of molten crystal. This fortifies the ball. Now he begins shaping the ball using various wooden tools. This one's called a block. He uses another tool, a divider, to create grooves so the ball will fit into a mold. The blower soaks the wooden tools in water so they won't burn. He now inserts the ball into a steel mold, one of 150 this company uses for its collection. The craftsmen coat the inside of the mold beforehand with a paste of cork dust, linseed oil, and charcoal dust. This prevents the ball from sticking, which would cause flaws in the crystal. The blower releases the ball, now called the bowl, using a foot pedal. After cooling the bowl for 1 minute, another craftsman called a stemmer adds another gather to create the stem of the wine glass. He clips the gather with heat-resistant scissors. He uses a wooden divider to shape the stem area and a metal divider to stretch the gather into the shape of the stem. The stemmer must be highly skilled. There's no mold or pattern to follow. He relies entirely on eyesight, intuition, and patience. He cools the stem with layers of wet newspaper. Next, another craftsman adds more gather to create the foot of the glass. He uses a wooden tool called a pitch to flatten the foot. He also shapes the foot by hand with wet newspaper. This metal template ensures it's generally the right dimensions. Everything is handmade, so each piece may differ slightly. This company makes 20 models of glasses, including different styles for red, white, port, and ice wines. The piece then goes into a kiln at 840 degrees Fahrenheit. At the end of the day, they switch off the kiln to let the glasses gradually cool overnight to room temperature. The next day, a craftsman uses an acetylene torch to cut the glass and remove the cap. They use an old record turntable to spin the glass around and make the cut. For precision, they smooth and bevel the rim with a diamond-coated steel grinder. Another craftsman, called a cutter, marks out a grid with a waterproof pen. He uses another type of turntable to steady his hand as he draws. It's not an exact pattern, just a general guideline to create the design of the piece. This design's called the Titanic. It's based on a light fixture from the ocean liner. Water cools, lubricates, and cleans the area during cutting. There are two types of cutting, wedge and flat. Wedge cutting creates the deep, intricate cuts. Flat cutting creates smoother, less angled cuts. Here they use the wedge method, which can only be done with diamond-tipped wheels. Here the cutter creates a diamond-shaped grid called a caro cut. Finally, the cutter creates a star-shaped cut spanning the entire foot of the glass. Once the decorations are complete, an inspector does a detailed quality check before etching the company logo. The Black Forest region of southwest Germany is world famous for its cuckoo clocks, which have either 1-day or 8-day movements, meaning that's how long they run on one winding. The standard feature is a little bird that emerges and cuckoos when the clock strikes. Some clocks also play music and have moving figures. The intricate carvings that decorate many cuckoo clocks start out as a block of linden, a soft wood that's easy to carve. An artisan first outlines the basic shape using a stencil and paint, then cuts it out with a jigsaw. Here he's cutting 3 blocks at once. To steady the piece, he mallets it to nails protruding from a block of wood. Then he begins carving, using up to 50 different knives to sculpt exceptionally fine detail. The clock cases these carvings decorate are made of pine or plywood, depending on the model. Often a case has no carving at all. Instead, an artist paints an elaborate design. Some cases feature a combination of painting and carving. The technical artistry is on the inside. The clock's brain, called the movement, is a system of brass and steel gears. It keeps time and triggers the cuckoo function. The components and configuration vary according to whether it's a 1-day or 8-day movement. Workers sandwich the movement between 2 brass plates, connecting them at the corners with long screws. Then on the outside, they install the mechanism that times the chime. Next, the steel wire on which the cuckoo bird will perch. Then last but not least, the reels that will move the clock hands. The factory runs every finished movement for 2 days straight to ensure it functions perfectly. The first part that goes on the clock case is the dial. They tack it with tiny nails. Next, the wooden cuckoo bird. They insert the movement's perch wire through a hole in his foot, then secure it with a screw so he doesn't fly off. After trimming his tail so he'll fit, they screw the movement, bird and all, inside the case. Next, the steel wires that operate the components that produce the cuckoo sound. We'll see them shortly. And finally, the dial's wooden hands. Every cuckoo clock has 2 chains that regulate the speed at which the movement gears turn. As we see here in slow motion, an automated machine makes these chains 1 link at a time by first cutting, then bending pieces of brass wire. Each chain goes into the case through a hole in the bottom, then onto a wheel in the movement, then back out through another hole in the bottom of the case. S-hooks go onto the ends. These will hold cast iron weights that pull the chain. Workers rig up a small wire connecting the bird and the door. This opens the door when he comes out to cuckoo. As this demonstration shows, the bird's cuckoo is actually the sound of air pumping in and out of 2 miniature bellows. Before each cuckoo, the hammer on the end of this steel wire hits a tiny gong. The number of gong cuckoos indicates the hour. After connecting the bellows to the movement, there's just 1 step left, running a wire from the movement through the bottom for the pendulum. The technical choreography can now begin. Winding up the clock raises the chain, pulling up the weight on the end. As the weight falls back down gradually, it pulls the chain, which turns the movement, which drives the hands of the clock. The pendulum regulates the pace. At this factory, a clock gets the seal of approval only after a 2-day test run during which it must perform impeccably. It's this attention to detail, both artistic and technical, that makes these traditional German cuckoo clocks such timeless treasures.
The sport of curling is a combination of shuffleboard, billiards, and bowling on ice. Players aim a large stone at a target, while trying to knock the opponent's stones away from the target. As the stone glides along the ice, team members sweep brooms in its path to control its speed and trajectory. Curling stones are made of granite, but only 2 quarries in the world, one in Wales and one in Scotland, produce the unique type of granite that's required. A fine grain and free of quartz. This unique stone has 3 times the impact resistance of regular granite. The quarry tries to avoid traditional blast mining because that fractures the stone. Instead, they locate flaws in the rock face and pry chunks off of it with an excavator. This chunk weighs about 20 tons and is the size of a small car. The next step is to divide it into more manageable slabs, using a thick cable cutter with abrasive rings made of diamond particles. A large pulley system moves the cable against the rock at high speed, and the diamonds slowly wear through the granite. Avoiding flaws and weak points, workers trace circles the size of curling stones on the best quality areas. The cut slab then moves inside the quarry building, where this core drill's diamond cutters bore right through the slab, excising a blank that will become a curling stone. The blanks weigh almost 60 pounds apiece. Workers lift them out with an industrial-strength suction cup, then transfer them to a container bound for a curling stone factory in Canada. There, a drill bores a channel a little over a ½ inch wide right through the center. This is for attaching the curling stone's handle. But that's still a long way off. First, this machine has to carve the blank into the shape of a curling stone. The machine's curved arm is lined with diamond cutters. It shapes half the stone, then workers flip the blank over so it can finish the other half. The next machine carves out a pocket in the bottom of the stone. This will hold a high-resistance insert of extra fine-grained Scottish granite that will extend the curling stone's life. After lining the pocket with epoxy, the insert is positioned. A hydraulic press expels any trapped air and holds the insert in place until it firmly bonds. Next, a grinding machine, following a template, makes a center cup in both the top and bottom of the stone. Curlers can attach the handle to either cup, depending on which granite surface they want gliding on the ice. Workers bolt the stone to a spinning polisher and buff the surface with 5 progressively finer grades of diamond abrasive pads. Then they blast the side with tiny glass beads. This pits the surface to better distribute impact force, preventing the side from chipping as it strikes other stones. Running the top and bottom over coarse sandpaper gives the stone more traction on ice. The finished curling stone weighs in at 40 pounds. The factory molds the stone's handle from durable, impact-resistant plastic. This computer-guided engraving machine can embellish it with any name or logo. Paint is applied to the recessed areas to make the lettering or design stand out. Finally, the finished handle is bolted through that center hole drilled earlier. From the quarry, to the factory, to the ice, this beautifully crafted curling stone is ready for competition.